Okay, I want to start this deep dive with a bit of a blind taste test. I'm going to describe a country to you, and I want you to guess who I'm talking about.
I love a pop quiz. All right, lay it on me.
All right, so picture this. A nation that is an absolute economic juggernaut. We're talking about a place that is single-handedly responsible for churning out 25% of the entire world's manufacturing output.
25%?
1 out of every 4 things made on Earth comes from this one empire.
Okay, that is a massive, massive slice of the global pie.
And it gets better. It's a military titan with, cutting-edge technology, and the rest of the world is basically tripping over themselves just to get a trade permit to do business there. Who are we talking about?
If I were looking at the data today, or maybe the last 20 years, I'd say China.
Right.
Or if we're talking mid-20th century, the United States.
It does sound like that, doesn't it? But we are dialing the clock way back to the year 1700. We are talking about the Mughal Empire.
Which is so fascinating because when you say the word Mughal, to most people, they don't think industrial powerhouse or military innovator. They think Taj Mahal.
Right. They think of beautiful gardens, poetry, maybe a really nice tomb. It feels very aesthetic,
And don't get me wrong, the Taj Mahal is spectacular, but focusing only on the architecture is like remembering the Roman Empire just for the Colosseum.
Yeah, and forgetting.
Forgetting they built the road network that connected the known world or, the legal system that underpins modern law.
So that is our mission for this deep dive. We're going to take this stack of articles and historical analyses and really move past the marble and the domes. We need to figure out how this dynasty, which ruled South Asia for over 3 centuries, actually functioned.
How it worked.
We're talking about a bureaucratic machine that was shockingly modern.
And effectively the industrial workshop of the early modern world.
But before we get to the guns and the money, we have to clear up the branding. Because I was reading through the background notes, and this actually surprised me. The Mughals. They didn't call themselves Mughals?
No, they didn't. That's a label that was applied by outsiders. Mughal is actually the Indo-Persian form of Mongol.
Okay.
It was used by people in India to distinguish these new rulers from the earlier Afghan dynasties. It was a nod to their heritage, sure, but if you could time travel and ask the emperors who they were, they would have looked at you funny.
So what would they have said? I mean, hi, I'm the Mughal emperor. That just wouldn't fly.
Definitely not. They would have called their dynasty Gurkhani, which means son-in-law, or simply the Timurids.
Because they trace their lineage back to Timur and Genghis Khan.
Exactly. They were of Turco-Mongol origin from Central Asia, modern-day Uzbekistan. But here's the nuance that often gets lost. Culturally, they were thoroughly Persianized. They spoke Persian at court, they consumed Persian literature, they loved Persian art. So, calling them Mongols is a bit like calling the British royal family Germans because of their Hanoverian ancestry.
It's technically true, but it misses the entire cultural reality.
Exactly, who they were day to day.
So we have these Turco-Mongol Persian rulers dropping into the Indian subcontinent. And when we say India here, we need to set the stage geographically. We're not just talking about the area around New Delhi.
Oh, not even close. At its peak, this empire was. It was a leviathan.
Just massive.
Truly. It stretched from the outer fringes of the Indus River Basin and northern Afghanistan in the west.
All the way across to?
All the way across to the highlands of Assam and Bangladesh in the east.
And verticality, too. North to south?
From Kashmir in the snowy north down to the Deccan Plateau in the south. We're talking about roughly 4 million square kilometers.
I mean, that is a staggering amount of territory to control, especially in the 16th and 17th centuries when you don't have telegraphs or railways.
No.
You don't control that much land just by asking nicely.
No, you do it with firepower. And that brings us to the founder, Babur.
Babur's story.
Uh-huh.
It reads like an adventure novel. He's essentially a prince without a kingdom, right?
Pretty much. He was a survivor. He was ousted from his ancestral lands in Central Asia. He turned his ambitions south toward India, not necessarily because it was his first choice. He actually preferred the climate of Kabul.
Really?
But because he needed a domain. He needed resources.
So in 1526, he rolls up to Panipat near Delhi to face the Sultan of Delhi, Ibrahim Lodi. Now, I looked at the numbers in the military accounts. Babur should have been crushed.
He was seriously outnumbered.
Significantly.
But the First Battle of Panipat is a watershed moment in military history. It wasn't just a battle, it was a technology demonstration. Historians classify the Mughals as one of the three Islamic gunpowder empires.
Along with the Ottomans and the Safavids.
Exactly. So while the Sultan of Delhi is relying on traditional medieval forces, lots of elephants, heavy cavalry, the stuff that had worked for centuries,
Babur is bringing something new to the party.
He is. He employed a specific formation he learned from the Ottomans. He set up his artillery and firearm-equipped infantry in the center. But here's the key technical detail. They were protected by a barrier of wagons.
Wagons?
Yeah, tied together with leather thongs.
So it's sort of a mobile fortress.
It creates a physical wall in the middle of the battlefield. It completely neutralized the Sultan's cavalry charge. The Delhi forces slammed into this defensive wall and were just cut down by field artillery and matchlock guns.
Wow.
It changed the game in South Asia. Personal courage didn't matter as much as having the better kill chain.
Speaking of kill chains, there was one detail in the military reading that I honestly thought was a typo at first.
Let me guess. Rockets.
Rockets. The bands, I always assume rocketry is a modern thing, or maybe something from the Napoleonic Wars, the rocket's red glare.
Right.
But the Mughals were using metal cylinder rockets in the 16th century.
They were. And this really ramped up under Emperor Akbar. These weren't fireworks. They were metal cylinders packed with gunpowder attached to bamboo guidance sticks.
And Akbar used them specifically as anti-elephant weapons.
Which makes total sense. You have these massive war elephants charging you loud noises, screeching projectiles.
It's going to cause panic.
It causes them to stampede their own troops. And the tech got better. By the time you get to Emperor Aurangzeb in the mid-1600s, during the Siege of Badar, you have accounts of a rocket strike actually hitting the defender's gunpowder depot.
That's the lucky shot that wins the war.
It blew the roof off the defense, literally. So when we picture Mughal warfare, we shouldn't just picture guys with swords on horses. We should picture artillery barrages, matchlock volleys, and specific units dedicated to rocket strikes.
Okay, so they conquer this massive area with gunpowder. But as any historian knows, conquering is the easy part.
Holding it together.
That's the nightmare. How did they keep this thing from falling apart for 300 years?
That brings us to the administrative machine, and really to Emperor Akbar. He ruled from 1556 to 1605. If Babur was the conqueror, Akbar was the architect.
The builder.
He built a centralized bureaucracy that was startlingly modern.
Let's unpack bureaucracy, because usually that's a boring word. But in the sources, it seems like this was the secret sauce that made the empire rich.
It absolutely was. See, Akbar realized that the biggest threat to an emperor is usually his own nobles.
Right.
If they have their own land and their own armies, eventually they'll try to take the throne. That's the story of feudalism. So he broke that system.
He created the Mansabdar system.
Right. Mansabdars were imperial officials. But here's the genius part. Their rank and their pay weren't determined by their tribal loyalty or who their grandfather was. It was, at least in theory, a meritocracy.
Based on performance.
Based on performance. And crucially, they were transferable.
And that's the key, isn't it? You couldn't just sit in one province for 30 years building up your own little kingdom.
No. The emperor could say, great job in Gujarat, now you're moving to Bengal.
It kept the elite loyal to the center, not to the local land. They were employees of the state.
Precisely. And to pay for all this, they revolutionized the revenue system. It was called ZAP.
This is the shift to cash taxes.
Yes. So in the medieval period, you often paid taxes in kind and green, goats, whatever you grew. The Mughals changed that. They demanded taxes be paid in silver currency.
Okay, pause on that for a second, because I want to make sure I get why this is such a big deal. Why does it matter if a peasant pays in wheat or in silver coins?
It changes the fundamental behavior of the entire population. If you're a peasant and you have to pay the emperor in silver, you can't just grow enough to eat.
You can't just hand over a bushel of wheat.
Right. You are forced to take your surplus to a market and sell it to get that cash.
It forces the entire agrarian population into the market economy.
It monetizes the empire. It jump-started trade at the village level. And the Mughals facilitated this by standardizing the currency. They issued the rupiah, a high-purity silver coin, and the copper dam.
So the money was good everywhere.
You could trust it anywhere in the empire, which made trade incredibly efficient.
It's impressive. It sounds almost like a modern Federal Reserve system combined with a rigid civil service. But a system that rigid can also be cruel. I read a story about Emperor Jahangir that suggests they tried to balance this
Yeah.
cold efficiency with a personal touch. The chain of justice.
Ah, yes. At the Agra fort, Jahangir installed a literal golden chain with bells on it. The idea was that if you were a common subject and you felt the local officials, the judges or governors, were corrupt or ignoring you,
You could go pull the chain,
you could go to the fort and pull the chain.
bypassing the whole bureaucracy and ringing a bell in the emperor's bedroom.
Ideally, yes.
Yeah.
Now, did it work practically for every single peasant? Probably not. I doubt the guards just let anyone walk up to the chain. But the symbolism was so powerful.
Yeah.
It reinforced the idea that the emperor was the ultimate dispenser of justice, accessible to the people, maintaining the balance against his own officials.
So we have the guns, we have the bureaucracy, and we have the cash system. Let's talk about the result of all that, the economy. We started by saying they had 25% of the world's manufacturing output. What were they making?
In a word, textiles. The sources describe the Mughal economy as undergoing proto-industrialization.
Meaning they were right on the edge of an industrial revolution.
In many ways, yes. It was very similar to 18th century Europe. And the engine was cotton. We tend to forget how valuable cotton was before mass production. It was white gold.
And it wasn't just for domestic use. This was a global export.
Oh, absolutely. Indian textiles clothed the world. From Southeast Asia to Europe, everyone wanted Indian calicos, muslins, and silks. The demand was so high that there was a constant stream of precious metals, silver and gold, flowing into India to pay for these goods.
So India was basically a sink for the world's bullion.
Yes, because they exported so much, imported very little in terms of manufactured goods.
And the center of this production wasn't Delhi, right? It was Bengal.
The Bengal Suba. The sources describe it as the paradise of nations. It was the wealthiest province by far.
I saw a stat about shipbuilding in Bengal that I had to double check because it seemed way too high.
The tonnage comparison.
Yes. In the 16th and 17th centuries, Bengal's shipbuilding output was estimated at over 223,000 tons annually.
It's a massive number. To put that in perspective, compare it to the North American colonies, places like New York and Boston more than a century later. Between 1769 and 1771, the North American colonies produced just over 23,000 tons.
So Bengal is producing 10 times the shipping tonnage of colonial America, even 100 years earlier.
It just shows you the sheer scale of the operation. And this wealth did trickle down, to an extent. The historian Shireen Musfi has estimated that per capita income in the late 16th century, measured in purchasing power for wheat, was actually higher than it was in British India in the early 20th century.
That is a startling comparison. It really flips the whole narrative of economic progress. And it wasn't just rural wealth. People were moving to cities.
Yes. Urbanization was around 15%. That might sound low to us, but at the time, Europe hadn't reached that level. Mughal India was more urbanized than Europe. Cities like Agra, Lahore, and Delhi were massive metropolises with populations hitting 1 million.
It wasn't just volume, though. It was innovation. I want to talk about the impossible object, the seamless celestial globe. This is my favorite aha moment from the reading.
This is a favorite example for historians of science. It was invented in Kashmir around 1589 by a metallurgist named Ali Kashmiri ibn Luqman, and it's a hollow metal globe cast in one piece without any seams.
And for a long time, modern metallurgists looked at these and said, no way, you can't do that with 16th century tech.
Right, because usually you'd cast two halves and solder them together. But this was one piece. They used a very sophisticated lost wax casting technique where the mold is broken away.
It was a feat of metallurgy that Europe couldn't replicate at the time.
And it really challenges that old stereotype of the stagnant East versus the innovative West.
Absolutely. The Karkhanas, the imperial workshops, they weren't just making pretty swords. They were pushing the boundaries of material science.
And speaking of pushing boundaries, we have to mention the architecture. But I want to look at it through the lens of synthesis. It's not just Muslim architecture, is it? No. And that's the key to the Mughal aesthetic. Take the Red Fort or the Taj Mahal. You see the Persian influence in the domes and the symmetry. But look at the materials, red sandstone. Look at the decorative motifs, lotuses, elephants. Those are Hindu elements.
Like a visual representation of their political strategy.
It is. The Mughals blended Timurid, Persian, and Indian styles to create something totally unique. They were saying, we aren't just foreign rulers occupying this land, we are of this land.
They were also plugged into the global network agriculturally. I was surprised to see New World crops showing up in the sources.
Globalization in action. By the mid-17th century, Indian farmers were growing maize and tobacco crops native to the Americas. They adopted them quickly.
Which contradicts the idea that these were traditional societies resistant to change.
Absolutely. They saw a better crop and they planted it.
Yeah.
Indian peasants were even using the seed drill before it was widely adopted in Europe.
So we have this wealthy, innovative, militarily powerful empire. But we aren't speaking Persian right now. It didn't last. We have to talk about the decline. And it seems like all roads lead to one man, Aurangzeb.
Aurangzeb, the last of the great Mughals.
And he is a massive paradox. Under his reign, the empire reached its greatest geographical extent.
Bigger than ever.
He conquered the Deccan. He ruled more of India than anyone before him.
But in doing so, did he break the machine?
That is the big historical debate. On one hand, you have the argument that his religious conservatism destabilized the empire. He reinstated the jizya tax on non-Muslims, which Akbar had abolished. He destroyed some temples. People argue this alienated the Hindu majority and the Rajput allies, who were the backbone of the military.
But looking at the sources, it seems like the reality is a bit more complicated. It is. The data shows that Aurangzeb actually employed more Hindus in his bureaucracy than his predecessors did. He also patronized many non-Muslim institutions. So painting him simply as a bigot who single-handedly wrecked the empire it's too simplistic. It ignores the structural issues.
So if it wasn't just religion, was it the money?
It was imperial overstretch. Aurangzeb spent the last decades of his life fighting these relentless wars in the south, in the Deccan.
So he was away from the capital.
For years, decades, this just drained the treasury. The kill chain we talked about earlier gets really expensive when you run it for 20 years straight.
It burns through cash.
And the administrative links between the center and the provinces began to fray. When the emperor is gone for decades, the local governors start thinking, well, maybe I don't need to send all the tax revenue to the capital.
The mice start carving out their own kingdom.
Exactly. By the time Aurangzeb died in 1707, the treasury was empty and the administration was exhausted.
And after him, it's just a free fall. The Hollow Crown era. Yes. From 1707 to 1857, the dynasty continues, but they're increasingly just figureheads. Real power shifts to regional states like the Marathas, the Nizams of Hyderabad.
And eventually the British East India Company.
Right. And then there's the looting. You can't forget Nader Shah.
It's 1839.
Nader Shah invades from Persia. He sacks Delhi. The devastation was total. He stripped the Mughal treasury of its accumulated wealth, including the famous Peacock Throne and the Kohinoor Diamond. That moment essentially broke the Mughals' ability to pay for a large army ever again. So for the next century, they're emperors in name only, confined to the Red Fort, writing poetry while others rule. Until the very end in 1857.
The Indian Rebellion, the Sepoy Mutiny.
The rebels marched to Delhi and declared the aged emperor Bahadur Shah Zafar as their leader. When the British crushed the rebellion, they deposed him.
He was exiled to Rangoon, Burma, ending the dynasty for good. It was a quiet end to a very loud history.
But they left a mark. You can't wipe out 3 centuries of history.
No, the legacy is everywhere. It's in the Urdu language, which was born in the military camps and markets of the empire, a blend of Persian, Arabic, and local dialects. It's in the cuisine. Mughal food is still what people eat in restaurants all over the world.
You know, there's one image from the sources that really stuck with me. It's from the fall of Delhi in 1857.
The Ice House.
Yes. The British historian William Dalrymple mentions it. Amidst the chaos, the fighting, the end of an era, there was an ice house in Delhi.
It's a haunting image. This was a structure designed to store ice for the luxury of the court, a symbol of their mastery over the environment, their incredible supply chains that could bring ice to the hot plains.
And in the final days, it wasn't being used for sorbet, it was serving as a bunker for rebels.
It perfectly encapsulates the tragedy. You have this remnant of sophisticated infrastructure, a symbol of extreme luxury and stability, now serving as a desperate shelter in a war zone.
It really makes you think. This was an empire that once produced a quarter of the world's GDP. They had the rockets, the cash, the ships, the bureaucracy, and yet it unraveled so completely that the last emperor died in exile and his capital was looted.
It's a reminder that economic dominance and military tech are not guarantees of permanence. Empires are fragile things. They rely on cohesion, on legitimacy, and on a balanced treasury. Once those crack, even the giants fall.
A sobering thought to end on. That's our deep dive into the Mughals, not just builders of tombs, but builders of the early modern world.
It was a pleasure to unpack it with you.
And thank you for listening. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.